He loves my mind, and he drinks Johnny Walker.
Wild for Bacardi.
I love a woman who knows what to wear, especially behind the ears.
Only one thing will get a man out of his suit faster.
It is no secret that among all the advertisers' most prevalent weapons, sex has been probably the most important. To some extent, it has always been so, and it has never been unusual for advertisers of clothing and perfume to equate their products with sex in advertising.
Sex is being used with increasing frequency to promote a large number of other products which have traditionally been sold using other methods. Now, it's not unlikely to see a large number of scantily clad men and women selling everything from cigarettes and soft drinks to magazine and vacation resorts.
It's been our purpose during the course of this project to examine the phenomenon of sex in advertising more closely, with each member tackling a different aspect of the issue.
To this end, we have collected examples of ads that use sex as a means of selling their products. We have conducted a analysis of how this type of ad has changed over the years. We've talked to professors here on campus and done some investigation from other experts into the field. And we've used this information to try and establish an ethical principle concerning the matter of sex in advertising.
Whenever a manufacturer wishes to present his product to the public's attention, he will hire an advertising agency to develop an advertising campaign. Regardless of the nature of the product in question, it may be a brand new product or it may be a well-known product to the consumer but in need of a new selling strategy. The planning of an advertising campaign involves answering a number of questions that are as important as they are basic. Such questions might include:
what sort of product are we trying to persuade the customer to buy?
To which consumers are we aiming our advertisements? Is this a product that will appeal more to men than women, to adults rather than children, to elderly shoppers rather than younger shoppers?
Who is our competition? What kind of advertisements are our competition using, and how can we go them one better?
To answer these and other similar questions are what provide the advertisers with the basis for developing an advertising strategy. And a key part of that strategy is figuring out just what persuasive appeals are to be used in that campaign's foundation. There are a great many types of appeals and strategies that can be used in an advertising campaign, but these can be divided into three basic substructures. These categories would include, number one, the direct approach. This selling technique emphasizes information about the product, often comparing the product to its most well-known competitor. Number two, the indirect approach. This strategy attempts to associate the product in question with something which potential buyers will believe to be attractive or desirable. And number three, the saliency approach. This method of selling simply endeavors to make the brand name of the particular product noticeable. A good example of this particular approach might be the current television campaign for Levi's 501 button-down blue jeans, a series of animated spots which say nothing at all about the pants themselves, but which are memorable simply because of the imaginative animation.
The direct and the indirect approaches are similar to one another in one respect. Both are designed to either shape or alter the attitudes of the consumers, thereby making them more likely to purchase the particular product. The saliency approach, on the other hand, attempts no such change. It simply attempts to increase the likelihood of remembering a particular brand when you go out to buy a specific product. Of the three approaches, it is the indirect which most often finds itself the target of criticism. This is because the associations that are made between the product and what's going on in the ad really tell us nothing about the product's nature or the product's quality. In addition, the associations most often have little or no basis in fact. Now, ads that rely on sexual themes fall into this indirect category.
Even within the overall category of the indirect approach, there are numerous ways in which sexual themes may be utilized. One such approach may be called the subtle method, in which sex is merely hinted at within the context of the advertisement. This method of portraying sex was the first to be used on a widespread scale and took on a number of different forms. Men staring at a sweater-clad girl in a Woolite television ad, a man fighting off hordes of amorous women in a high karate cologne ad, and a couple frolicking on the beach in a cigarette ad which contains the slogan, "Alive with Pleasure." One of the examples of the modern use of the subtle approach can be found in a recent issue of Rolling Stone magazine. The ad for the Bugle Boy brand of men's clothing consisted of a photograph of several articles of men's clothing lying on the floor next to what would seem to be a bed. What would seem to be, because all that is visible of the bed is the edge of a blanket or bedspread hanging just above the floor at the top of the photograph. Below the photograph is the following message: "Only one thing will get a man out of his suit faster." That's all there is to the ad, but the implication is clear. One need not to be a rocket scientist to deduce exactly just what the "only one thing" mentioned in the ad might be. The suggestion of a bed with the man's clothes lying on the floor next to it strengthens the suggestions. Here are other examples of the subtle approach.
This advertisement for the Parliament Light cigarette beautifully portrays a colorful scene of two people frolicking on a beach, one male and obviously one female. It's interesting that at the top of the ad, in caption, "the perfect recess," and then goes on to define what they mean by recess: a break from activity for rest or relaxation. This ad by Avon for the cologne Undeniable portrays the three beautifully clad women behind the celebrity Billy D. Williams, a well-known figure. Underneath Billy D. Williams, the caption, "I love a woman who knows what to wear, especially behind the ears," portraying beautiful women, portraying the characteristics of beauty being possessed by this cologne. Guess jeans. Very basic, black and white, male and female, on a basic beach with no background. It's interesting that he's holding her very closely, and the association that if you wear Guess jeans, you too can find pleasure like this.
Another method used in advertising is called the blatant approach, or the most obvious approach, and this is the method most used in advertisements. One of the best examples of the obvious category is the recent Bacardi rum ads. A pair of young women on the beach are being offered a bottle of Bacardi by a tuxedoed waiter, but the photo is cropped in such a way as to emphasize the sexiness of the two women. They are shown only from the neck down and close to the camera, thereby drawing attention to their chest, legs, and hips. All that appears of the waiter is his arm. While there is nothing particularly sexual about a waiter offering a product, the woman's attire and the way it is accentuated by the photographer hint at the possibility of sex. There are very many variations of this technique.
Other examples of blatant sexual advertisings would include this first one by Bonjour for Bonjour Fashions. Notice the male and female overtake the picture, almost crowding out the Bonjour as her hand across his shoulder moves across the words, giving both the symbols of the man and the woman priority in this picture. Notice also that because she is standing over him, she's a greater figure in the picture. Also notice, do I need to draw attention to her cleavage, which is very apparent behind his head. Also, she's draped very sexually over the man. Another ad by Johnny Walker, this one visually stimulating through the color of the bathing suits that the two runners are wearing. She turns to her friend, "He loves my mind, and he drinks Johnny Walker." In this visual calliope, does he really love her mind? Is she running out on a beach scantily clad because she has a great mind? Or does he love her for her body? But he does drink Johnny Walker. It has been shown previously in other studies that black and white advertisements and entertainment themes can be used in order to stimulate greater imagination. Stimulate your imagination by wearing what she's wearing, Guess jeans, in a black and white ad. She seems to be having fun, and she seems to be wearing not much more than the Guess jeans. The Guess jeans also being in red, the three basic colors, gray, black, and red.
A third method, which has become increasingly popular among the advertisers during the past decade, is that which we have come to call the erotica approach. These are the ads which leave little or nothing to the consumer's imagination. Nude and semi-nude models actively participate in suggestive or openly sexual activities, and we are led to believe that using the products in question will give us the opportunity to be just as decadent as the models in the ads. There was a time when such ads might have appeared only within the pages of such men's magazines as Playboy or Penthouse, or within Cosmopolitan for women. Today, however, they can be found in a wide variety of publications, ranging all the way from Time to the Ladies' Home Journal. Ads of this nature are most often used to promote cosmetic or clothing products, most noticeably perfumes and blue jeans. The same issue of Rolling Stone, which was featured the aforementioned Bugle Boy ad, also contained an example of each of these erotica-type ads. The first was a 2-page advertisement for Calvin Klein's Obsession perfume and cologne. The first page of the ad simply showed us only a name of the product itself, but the second featured a full-page photo of a nude man standing away from the camera and particularly obscured by shadows, carrying a nude woman over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. The image seemed to be one of domination, with the woman willfully submitting to the desires of the man.
The advertisement on the right hand for Halston, using a very well-known model, Cindy Crawford, in her Halston, appears to be wearing very little, silhouetted in black, a very sexual color, presented in full light, seeming to enjoy the fact that all she has on is her Halston, to provoke men or women for the Halston cologne. The one on the left of the screen, believe it or not, if you can tell in the uppermost right corner, is for a liqueur. Interesting that she's just wearing a simple towel about her hips. These next two erotic ads, the one on the right hand, they actually do have a representation of the product in the image, but it's interesting that the caption at the bottom of the right hand ad, only if you promise to keep those sunglasses on. This is a very sexual pose with the woman on top, the man appearing to look away and yet continuing to have his sunglasses on. Are you able to tell if either of them are clothed or even partially clothed? The man seems to have a shirt on, but not much of that shirt remains on. And the ad on the left is actually for a watch, believe it or not. You can see it on the top of the advertisement, but if you see both of the people underneath, it's a very sexual position with the woman on top. And can you even see a watch on either of their wrists? No, I don't believe you'll be able to. But if you do buy this Paris watch, you too can have this type of sensual pleasure. This last ad, interesting enough, in black and white, again, a topless photo, frontal nudity, but it's interesting most that this was found in a men's magazine. What's the advertisement for? It's for pantyhose or hosiery for women, a woman standing topless on a beach.
Now that we've had a chance to show you what some of the print ads look like, we wanted to take this opportunity to show you a few examples of television ads that use sex as a selling tool.
This is funky, this is rare, something crazy in the air. Ooh, Malibu. You're looking like a superstar in Malibu, that's what you are. Ooh, Malibu. Sunshine fresh. Malibu. Musk.
There are those who thirst for something different, something beyond the ordinary. For them, there is a beer that refreshes like no other. Michelob Dry. Once you've experienced its bold taste, with no aftertaste, there's no going back.
Mama told me you better shop around. You better shop around.
Close time. Deck those women in close time gear. New low prices are spreading cheer. Close time.
Just in time for the holidays, Close Time announces new lower prices.
You better shop around.
Shampoo and conditioner. The word means health. The name means beautiful.
Subliminal perception is virtually a subject that no one wants or is willing to admit exists. And if it does, how great are its effects upon the human being's persuasion? This is the part of the topic we would like to discuss as subliminal sexual persuasion in advertising. There are many aspects of this that are concluded upon, but the direct emphasis upon the unconscious mind of the buyer, the consumer. The advertiser pushes a product through some form of subliminal advertising using such things as sex, which is the predominant mode, or values of lots of money or wealth or good health, and all sorts of types of projects or products that you would not even believe that would correlate. One of the greatest measures of this is probably in this Gilbey's gin ad we have set up here for you. In this advertisement, it appears that there is just a Gilbey's bottle which has some condensation on it and a tall gin glass. The first thing I'd like to point out is the fact that there is ice in the gin glass. Now you may have already noticed that. That's fine. But the thing I would like to stress to you is the fact that ice in advertisements is nearly completely transparent. What I mean by that is, if you use ice in an advertisement, it's going to not show up. It's not going to be there apparently at all. So you're going to have to airbrush in the ice cubes. Those ice cubes are really not in that glass. They're airbrushed in, they're retouched the photograph. This particular advertisement represents a value between $40,000 and $60,000 for the advertiser in this single advertisement. Therefore, this is a very subjective advertisement. They've done this on purpose. This is very literal, and it's very poignant, it's very disastrous, and can be dangerous. Turning back to the ad, notice there are 4 ice cubes in this ad. Take a deep breath, close your eyes for a moment, reopen them, and center just on the glass, casually, in a relaxed state of mind. What you see is probably just 4 ice cubes with some gin in it. What your mind eye is seeing is a word, a verbal suggestion. Actually a non-verbal suggestion because it's pointing to your subconscious. The first letter of this word, notice in the second ice cube down. I want you to concentrate on that for a moment. If you need to, go ahead and close your eyes one more time and then reopen them, concentrating more this time on the second ice cube. Your mind eye is reading this in the ice cube. An S. Simple enough. It's the curvature of the ice. It's the shadow playing upon both sides of the ice. But it is definitely there. And it is definitely reading your mind. Actually not reading your mind, it's reading for your mind. The next letter down, once I point it out to you, will become easily apparent. It's an E. S-E. 2 simple letters? Maybe. 2 simple letters? Definitely not, in my opinion. I bet you can all guess what the 3rd letter is without me having to spell it for you. Look at the 4th ice cube on the bottom. Look at the shadows that contour the shape of the ice. Now remember, this is all retouched. This is all air blown in on the photograph. An X. Simple enough. Sex. A suggestion for your subliminal person. If you drink Gilbey's gin, you're probably going to get a lot of this. Or you'll experience a lot of it. You'll probably become more popular and get more of it. This is the suggestion made to your mind through the advertisement of this product. Now if you're wondering, well, this is just sparsely located, they came across this, they're reading too much into this. This ad appeared in Time magazine with a readership of over 24 million persons on the average weekly readership for this 1971 issue. Remember, 1971, a readership of 24 million. Now this is just one of the advertisers, one of the magazines that the advertiser sponsored with. There were 2 other major magazines that had a readership of over 15 million people. Considering the wide diversity of readership and as many people as they have reached, could this be a farce? Could it be a mistake? Could it be an accident? I don't think so. Remembering the fact that ice is nearly transparent, shown in advertising. Something I like to show you up front. Looking again at the fourth ice cube. Concentrate more on the left side of the ice cube this time. Your left side, as you're looking at the advertisement. See with me, if you will. Here is her forehead, her nose, and her chin. Maybe it's more apparent if I show it to you up here. Here's her forehead, an eye, a nose, a chin. It's a woman's face. You're wondering, could this really be a woman's face? Well, if it is, and if your mind's eye does perceive it, what effect is it having on it? What can you do about that effect? If it is, let's suppose that this is a woman's face, where is she looking? She's looking at the bottom of the advertisement. Now, I'm not going to give you the details of the bottom of the advertisement. It's a very dangerous advertisement. It's a very deceptive advertisement. And it's a very disgusting advertisement. It's unfortunate that we can't control these types of things. Build some kind of wall or some gate or some door that physically has to represent and open for us, for our minds to put out this type of pollution. But that's not the case. These people have invaded our minds without our willingness, without our knowing it. And they're subjecting us to this subliminal sexual advertising. What I have here is another blatant example of subliminal sexual advertising. It appears just to be a simple Benson and Hedges cigarette ad. What you see is a nice, kindly little old man with his glasses sliding off of his nose, preparing to paint just a simple set of letters in the window. He's enjoying a cigarette as he's painting. But if you notice, look carefully at the letters he's painting. Your mind eye has already seen them. The first letter that stands out is the E, because he's only partially done with that E. The second letter that stands out is the S. That's just merely stenciled in. He's not begun to paint the S yet. Your mind eye can in fact read in reverse, upside down, and reverse. So what your mind eye has already read is the S, the E, and then the center of the man's palm, where his lines cross in his hand, is an X. Simple enough. But your mind already read that before I told you about it, didn't it? What does the man have plenty of time? What is the symbolism in the background of him? He has plenty of time. A lot of clocks, a lot of time. What does the man have plenty of time for? Sex. Clocks, sex, and Benson and Hedges can provide you with all that, simply through one product. Smoke their cigarettes, you have plenty of time. One of the things that we concentrated on was the scientific aspect of it. How to prove that some of this sexual advertising actually existed. What I did was a content analysis. That means I sat down and through a group of magazines specifically chosen, I recorded how many sexual advertisements appeared per magazine. I did this for a common magazine, what I believe to represent a good slice of society, of American culture. I thought Time would be fine, and besides, they had enough issues of Time for us to go back over 2 or 3 decades. So I started with 1990. January through April 1990, on the average, there were 2 sexual advertisements per issue of Time. For that 4-month period, it was 26 sexual advertisements for those issues of Time, January through April of 1990. Going back to 1980, for the same periods of time, January through April of 1980, there were 22 sexual advertisements coded and found in Time. Going back to 1970, there were 12. So far we have 1990, 1980, and 1970. 26, 22, and 12. A major jump there in what would seem to represent American pop culture. Going back to 1960, January and February of 1960,
although those are only 2 smaller segments, I believe it also included March, there were only 6 that existed through that 3-month period, 6 in all the issues of the time. So recapping once more for the content analysis, January through April of 1990, there were 26. January through April 1980, there were 22. January through April 1970, there were 12. And January through March of 1960, there were only 6. So therefore, going back through a period of time, you see a gradual change of lessening. If you're following it chronologically, there are more sexual advertisements. 1960, it jumps to double to 1970. 1970, again, it almost doubles. And right at 1980, we begin to level off and see a current amount. Maybe there's a systematic appearance of how many sexual advertisements Time chooses to have sponsor their magazine. But it still appears that on the average, there are at least 2 to 3 sexual advertisements appearing in each and every issue of Time magazine. This part has been dubbed our content analysis to hopefully show and prove that it does exist, and it has increased over a period of time.
During the course of our investigation into this topic, we had the opportunity to speak to several Olivet professors in the religion and the business departments to try and get their input as to the ethical questions surrounding the use of sex in advertising. We thought that you might like to see some of their comments.
What religious and ethical principles are involved in the use of sex in advertising?
Well, there are a number of principles that come into play in the situation of sex in advertising, but I think one of the ones I think that is most important is to realize what ethics is. And you only have a situation of ethics when you have 2 or more people. If there's only one person in the entire universe, then essentially that person can behave any way they choose, and their actions technically can't be considered immoral. Morality only arises when there is more than one person, and you have 2 beings that are now interacting with one another. If one of these beings feels that he is being mistreated, he or she is being mistreated, and being treated unfairly by the other person, then they have a right to say to the other person, "You're treating me unfairly." And they enter into dialogue, and hopefully they can work out their relationship and agree on what is fair or not fair. And at that point, then, you have the basis for ethical rules. Rules that both beings agree to live by, agree to abide by, so that together they can live in a society harmoniously. Then you multiply that in communities with numbers of people, and one person may say to another person, "You're treating me unfairly," the other person may say, "I don't agree." And then the community can get involved and decide what they feel is fair, just treatment. And once that happens, then you also have rules and regulations being established. And what I think one of the basic principles, ethical principles, that's involved in sex and advertising is how people feel about what's going on in that situation. And if a man or a woman feels that they are being abused or taken advantage of, are forced to do something for economic pressure or for advancement in their career or their job, being forced to do something that takes away from their humanity or their conception, the conception they have of themselves as human beings, at that point then the situation becomes immoral. And that's when I think society needs to stand up and say, we don't want our people being treated in this fashion. So that's one. The ethical. The religious, of course, you bring God into the picture when you begin to talk about religion. He becomes the other being. And then the whole situation takes on a rather nebulous, I suppose, aspect in trying to determine what it is that God wants or doesn't want in a given situation.
All right. And what effect does this have on society? We've already touched on that some.
Sex in advertising, I think, has a number of effects, not all of them negative. Every society establishes certain sexual signals. It's in the animal world, it's in the human world. If you've ever noticed, a woman from India will very frequently have a mark, a beauty mark. Right? It's a small tattoo on her face. that is very sexually attractive to that society. It is not to our society. Every society develops for itself its own signals, sexual signals, that will attract a man to a woman and a woman to a man. Through what TV does, or any kind of medium, it helps society to reflect on what those signals are. And I think that's positive. It can also, again, I think, become negative when people are being forced into situations or events or people are being portrayed that are offensive to the society. And groups in the society begin to say, we do not think this is treating us in a fair manner. At that time, then, they have the right to speak up, and the society needs to get involved in a big discussion to decide what is and what is not appropriate.
All right. And the last question is, why is sex such an effective selling tool?
Well, I suppose one of the basic principles in selling is to get the other person's attention. You're never going to sell anything to a person that doesn't recognize you exist. The old saying that he who whispers down a well about the goods he has to sell will never reap the golden dollars like he who shows them round and hollers. Now, you've got to attract attention. And sex is a very effective means.
What do you feel about sex in advertising?
Well, in general, I feel that as a Christian, some is too much, or any is too much. But as one who evaluates advertising outside of the effects that it might have on myself or the consumers in general, I've observed that it's used to a large extent in advertising for everything from perfume products to, it comes up in really subtle ways in terms of household cleaning products. It's the image that you would like to have. It's telling us we can have or be something that maybe we aren't. And it's unusual, but not surprising that sex is used as a tool to convey that particular message.
How prominent is its use in advertising?
I'd say that it's fairly prominently used. We see in our advertising and marketing courses, we subscribe to Advertising Age to evaluate marketing strategies that are used for major, let's say, consumer packaged goods, everything from soap to cookies and biscuits or soft drinks. And we see examples of sex being used in advertising for a whole spectrum of different types of products, so very prominent.
How recently has this started to happen?
I would say that it's probably evolved over time, and certain aspects of society have become more and more aware of it as its use has increased, but I think it's probably something that has occurred right along with the historical development of advertising, at least in the United States.
What do you think its effects are on society?
Well, in general, I'd say that it confuses what the real issue is. If the issue is a business trying to promote a product, when we tie sex into it, it ties, like I was saying earlier, those ideas that you can have or you can be, or it provides a certain type of a psychological impact that confuses what the issue or what the intent of the advertising is. We can't all have and be what various forms of advertising promise us by purchasing certain products or by going certain places. So unfortunately, the people who seem to be impacted most by it are the younger generations of our society, children and teenagers who see it and are exposed to it in a number of forms, both television media and in print advertising, in magazines, and it's subtle. They cannot discriminate from what's right and what's wrong, and should that be there and shouldn't that be there.
Religious and ethical principles are involved in the use of sex in advertising.
Well, I think that basically sex is a God-given drive in human beings. It is in itself sacred and pure and right. I think oftentimes in advertising it's exploited to the point at which sex is degraded and demeaned and put in a wrong perspective. So I think that in so doing, we're violating Judeo-Christian principles of how we evaluate sex and how it is to be properly thought of and experienced. Advertising often does not seem to take into account the spiritual, the biblical, religious implications of what sex is to be.
All right. What effects do you think this has on society?
Well, I think people have a tendency to listen to ads, advertisements, and to be influenced by them in the sense of lowering and degrading sex. I think it also demeans persons, especially the woman, who is oftentimes the symbol, sex symbol of advertising. And so I think that it lowers the general standard of values, and especially the sense of religious values in our country, our nation.
Another aspect of advertising we talked about was the difference between American advertising and advertising which is produced in foreign countries. Much of this was based on my personal experience as a member of the United States Air Force. I was stationed in Greece for 9 months rather, and there's a vast difference in the way sex is used in advertising in Greece. It's much more explicit, both on television and in print media. It would not be unusual to drive down a highway in Greece and pass a billboard for Diet 7-Up, which featured a topless woman sitting on a beach sipping a can of Diet 7-Up. The television ads were also much more explicit. There would be examples of actual sexual acts being performed in reference to the products they were advertising. The one difference, however, was even though the sexual aspect was much more explicit, there was also a different message to it. Whereas in America, we tend to equate the product with sex and say, you can have this if you use our product. In Greece, and presumably also in other European countries, the idea is, you know, the product is not going to enhance your sex life. You've already got that, but use our product anyway because we think it's a good product. The one example that sticks out in my mind was an example for a perfume in which you see a commercial of a man walking home from work carrying a briefcase, very successful looking man, and as he's walking home, a lot of attractive young women come up and make eyes at him and flirt with him and so on, and he just kind of brushes them off. He gets home to his wife, a housewife, and she's cleaning the home and doing wifely duties, and he reaches into his briefcase and he pulls out a bottle of this perfume that he's bought her as a present, and she smiles and he sets the perfume down on the table, and then they start showing the intimate acts that such commercials go into. The implication here is this is a loving couple, they love each other, they have a very good physical relationship. She hasn't even used the product yet, so using the product hasn't made much of a difference in their relationship, but it's nice that he bought it for her anyway. Now the examples we have to show on this tape come not from Greece, but from Brazil, in which this same idea carries over. And pay particular attention to the Westinghouse appliance ads that are produced in Brazil, where the idea of love and sex and domesticity all kind of interrelate.
This Revlon commercial has come under criticism in the U.S. from people who say it's too sexy. But in Brazil, it probably wouldn't even make the viewer sit up and take notice, because Brazilian commercials are hotter than any advertisements made in the USA. Would an American appliance maker sell a refrigerator like this? Sex has been used as a selling tool in Brazil for the last 5 or 6 years. When the civilian government took power, many censorship restrictions were eased. And now, when Brazilians sit down to watch the tube, they really see advertisers basking in their newly won freedom of expression.
An interesting thing happened while we were putting this tape together this week. The Center for Science in the Public Interest presented its annual Harlan Hubbard Awards, better known as the Emmys, for the most misleading advertising of 1990. Bruce Silverglade, legal director for the organization, made the following statement in UPI's story regarding these awards. Advertisers have developed a seemingly boundless ability to dupe, deceive, and mislead the American public. It's about time we started asking what we are getting for the $125 billion that is being spent on advertising, useful information, or a barrage of misleading hype.
That's a fair question, one that's deserving of an answer. At a time when we may be faced by recession, we need to concern ourselves now more than ever with truth in advertising. Unfortunately, it's just not happening. Advertisers continue to tell us that we can improve ourselves by buying this pair of blue jeans or that cologne. We continue to believe them. In our paper on the topic, we discussed the oft-quoted Playboy philosophy. If it feels good, do it. A lot of advertisers have bought into this philosophy, and unfortunately, a lot of us are buying into it as well. The advertisers have been very successful in using that Playboy philosophy as a means of selling us their merchandise. What we need to do is understand that the Playboy philosophy is a lie. We need to educate ourselves and stand up as a group of people, all of American citizens, and demand that our advertisers be more honest and upfront with us. We need to stand for truth in advertising, and hopefully the presentation we've made today is a first step in that direction.